Good day and welcome to our online message for this week. My name is Deanne Carter and I serve as the pastor of Margarettsville and Lower Granville Baptist churches. In the past 3 weeks, we have been exploring the story of the Old Testament prophet Elijah. And in the story, 3.5 years have passed since Elijah obeyed God's call the first time. You remember when he went to King Ahab with the announcement that there would be no more rain except by his word when God would direct. And then after this announcement, Elijah was told by God to go to the Kerith ravine. He was fed by the ravens while he was there. And then he followed God's leading and he went to Zarephath. And he was provided for there by a widow with her jar of flour, her jug of oil, that miraculously continued to be replenished. He also performed the miracle of raising her son from the dead. Along with Elijah, we have witnessed God's faithfulness and his provision for this prophet in some pretty miraculous ways. And now in the story, we have God telling him it's time to take the next step. Over these years, King Ahab had searched everywhere for Elijah, but he had no luck finding him. Queen Jezebel had ordered all the prophets of the Lord to be killed. She wanted revenge because of the situation they were finding themselves in. And she maybe felt if she eliminated any perceived resistance, this might help things change and help her keep control. But things were now about to get a little more intense. Look at verse 1. It says, after a long time, in the third year, the word of the Lord came to Elijah. And this is 1 Kings chapter 18. It says, go and present yourself to Ahab, and I will send rain on the land. So Elijah went to present himself to Ahab. It was time for the people to choose who they would serve. It was time for Elijah to be obedient once again and go forward at God's command. So we see Elijah once again stepping out in faith and going to confront evil. He is obediently trusting God all the way, every step. Now, over this 3.5 years, while God was preparing Elijah for this role, the situation in the land had become desperate. The famine was severe, and King Ahab had summoned Obadiah, a man who was in charge of his palace, to help him search for grass to keep his horses and his mules alive. Now, of course, there's no mention of the king helping the people in his kingdom because he didn't care about them. He only cared about himself and his possessions. So we see that the king's plan was to split the territory. He would go one way and Obadiah would go the other way in search of grass for the animals. Well, Obadiah found more than grass. He crossed paths with the prophet Elijah. I wonder if that was coincidence. Nah, it was more like a divine appointment, I think. God planned for this to happen. Yes, of course, Elijah could have went directly to the king, but it seems that God wanted him to meet up with Obadiah for some reason and for it to play out the way that it did. Every life, our lives intersect, can be impacted as we allow God to work through us at all times. Have you ever thought of that? There are no chance encounters. It's not just meeting the main goals that are set before us that we are to strive towards, but we are to be open to opportunities everywhere along the way. This is what we see happening here between Elijah and Obadiah. And as a side note, in case you're wondering, There is no consensus among the scholars as to whether this Obadiah is the Obadiah who wrote the book of Obadiah in the Old Testament. Obadiah was a common name. There were a lot of them in the Bible. But we do know that this Obadiah had a high position and responsibility of leadership with the king, King Ahab. And Elijah had no way of knowing if he was a friendly or an unfriendly foe when he came upon him. However, we see that Elijah continued to trust in God's protection and guidance as always, and he confronts Obadiah. Now, this confrontation, it could have resulted in harm, even death for Elijah. But as we see, it didn't, because God provided once again. Elijah didn't fear, or if he did, he didn't let it stop him. Fear is a powerful emotion, isn't it? It can stop us in our tracks. It can paralyze us. It can cause us to doubt God's faithfulness and his promises. But in the story of Elijah and Obadiah, we once again witness, as we have before in his life story, the victory of faith over fear. Elijah had every reason to be afraid for his life. Being killed was a very real possibility, but Elijah also knew that his fear shouldn't be directed towards the king or his servants or any other human adversaries, but rather, listen to this, towards God. He was to have a healthy respect and awe of God and listen to him no matter what the cost, because God is the ultimate authority over all circumstances. When we shift our focus from the source of fear to the source of our faith, we gain a new perspective. Stop and think about that. Shift our focus from the source of fear to the source of our faith. This new perspective empowers us to keep moving forward. We don't become paralyzed because of the fear of what might happen. Our focus stays on God, and we know he is in control, however it ends for us. Imagine a tightrope walker performing a death-defying act high above a bustling city. And as the crowd gazes in awe, the performer confidently takes each step, knowing that the safety net below will catch them if they fall. Well, in the same way, when we place our faith in God, God becomes our safety net, and this enables us to go through life's challenges with courage and assurance. It was Elijah's faith in God that enabled him to step out in courage. He knew if God had protected him during the time of drought and famine, he would continue to provide and guide him as he faced danger. He wasn't overconfident. He didn't believe that it was his own strengths and abilities that would keep him safe. He knew it was all God. I wonder if this is how you and I approach life. All those daily struggles that we have to go through. Do we approach them all on our own? Or do we rely on God? When we face those fearful times, is our faith anchored to God so that fear does not paralyze us, doesn't stop us in our tracks? God's character, his promises are a powerful cure for our fear. So it follows then that if we immerse ourselves into his word, we discover promise after promise after promise of his presence, his protection, his provision. And we can be just like Elijah and cling to these promises because we know the promiser is faithful. Now, as we keep reading, we see something very interesting about Obadiah. In the midst of all this evil, the worship of Baal and other gods by his employers, by the king and the queen and everyone around him, we find out that Obadiah was a devout believer in the Lord. He was a man of faith. So this was going to actually be a friendly encounter for Elijah. Obadiah recognized him and he bowed down before him. But before we go any further, we need to look at Obadiah a little closer, because this scripture infers that Obadiah had some secrets. He was what we could call a closet Christian. He believes in God, but he's not telling anyone, especially those he works for, because Jezebel is actively killing all the prophets of God. If he were to stand up and declare his faith in God, he would have been killed on the spot. And look at verse 4, because we see there's another secret. When Jezebel began to exterminate the prophets of God, Obadiah took 100 of them and hid them in caves. Now, this was an amazing act of courage on his part, because if Jezebel had have gotten wind of what he had done, he surely would have been killed. But Obadiah was hiding his faith to keep himself out of trouble. So as we go back in this passage, we see in this encounter, Elijah says to Obadiah, "Go tell your master Elijah is here." And this creates a problem for Obadiah, because remember, he didn't want to get in trouble. It sort of put him in a moral dilemma. He knows that Ahab has been searching for Elijah, and revealing his presence could put his own life at risk if Elijah disappeared. So should he or shouldn't he? This is the dilemma. Could he trust him? And we see a conversation takes place between the two, and Elijah assures him that he will not disappear, but he will truly present himself before King Ahab that very day. And as we keep reading, we see that Obadiah eventually trusts Elijah's word, and he goes to tell the king this news to the king. He was now willing, after this encounter with Elijah, to walk in integrity, even if it came at a personal cost. He saw this in Elijah's life, and now he was showing it in his. He knew that Elijah's going before the king could probably result in his death. But he saw Elijah's faith and his obedience to God, and he was encouraged himself to act and to trust in God more, to not be afraid. It's so important for us as Christians to be people of integrity, because as we are obedient to God's principles, others will see and perhaps be drawn to live by these principles as well. Living this way is like sowing seeds that have the potential to bear fruit long after we're gone. Our actions today, they can inspire future generations to live in the ways of God. We're not to keep our Christian life, our relationship with God, a secret. God is always there. He's ready to work through our witness. Friends, God is in control. He is sovereign and he cares. And he's at work in each of our lives when we don't even realize it. When Obadiah first met Elijah, he had no idea of the significant role that he played in preserving the prophets of God during a time of terrible persecution. He didn't know what his actions, or that his actions would be honored and rewarded by God. But God's providence is like that, isn't it? It often unfolds in unexpected ways as God uses ordinary individuals like Obadiah to accomplish his plans. Through Obadiah's obedience and his willingness to protect and provide for the prophets, God saved their lives. You see, God's hand of providence often works quietly, using ordinary people in ordinary situations to fulfill His will. Stop and think about your own life for a moment. Have there been times when God's providence was evident, even though you may not have recognized it at the time? Perhaps it was a chance encounter with someone who encouraged you when you needed it so desperately. Maybe it was a closed door that led to an even greater opportunity for you. Or maybe it was something else. You see, these are the fingerprints of God's providence in our lives, guiding and directing us, often in ways we cannot fully understand. We have all lived through many seasons of life, each with its own set of challenges and uncertainties. And throughout all these moments, God was working in ways beyond our understanding to weave everything together and to accomplish His perfect will. And He's still working, and He's still weaving it all together. Through the lives of these two men, we learn about faith and obedience in challenging times. And their examples remind us that faith is not passive. It's a very active trust in God's faithfulness that sends us forward. So as we conclude this time together today, may we go seeking God's guidance, trusting His faithfulness, and stepping out in faith, knowing that He is with us every step of the way. God bless each of you. Take care, and I look forward to seeing you next week as we continue on looking at Elijah.